Alright, what's going on everyone, and welcome to the series in which I introduce you to all of the most powerful competitive decks in the modern format. The goal here is not to give an exact deck list as those change constantly, but rather to give a brief overview of how the deck works so you can be prepared if you're new to the format. Today we're looking at Goyro's Vengeance, which is an Esper Reanimator deck that brings back giant creatures from the graveyard in the early game. The reanimation spell of choice is the namesake card, Goyro's Vengeance, which I'm gonna struggle to say this entire video. It costs 2 mana and it will return a legendary, it doesn't have to be legendary, a legendary creature from the graveyard straight to the battlefield. You do have to sacrifice it at end of turn, but it gives it haste. So it's 2 mana, reanimate something, give it haste, it dies. However, that's not so bad because it's looking to reanimate Atraxa, Grand Unifier, or Ulamog the Defiler. The deck usually plays a full 4 copies of Atraxa and typically 2 to 3 copies of Ulamog. So Atraxa is the main target. So what makes Atraxa so appealing is when it enters, you look at the top 10 cards and you pick 1 card of every type to put into your hand. And so what this means is you can use it to find more copies of these 2 cards, right? You use Vengeance, you get Atraxa, Atraxa digs for more Atraxas and more Vengeances. However, there's another trick up the deck sleeve, and that is Ephemerate. So this lets you exile a creature you control, and then you return it to the battlefield at end of turn. What makes this so powerful is if you Ephemerate Atraxa, this is going to count as a different instance of the creature, so Vengeance won't cause you to sacrifice it. Not to mention it will re-enter and re-trigger its enter the battlefield effect, letting you dig another 10 cards deep for more cards. So basically you pay 2 mana, you use Vengeance, you reanimate Atraxa, you dig 10 cards deep, hopefully find an Ephemerate if you don't already have one, then you use the Ephemerate to blink Atraxa, which is going to dig 10 more cards deep, and at end of turn, Vengeance is going to try to sacrifice the creature it reanimated, but it technically doesn't exist because you blinked Atraxa. Also note that Ephemerate has Rebound, so the next turn you can target Atraxa again, dig 10 more cards deep. You can also cast a Goyro's Vengeance because it's an instant, reanimate another creature, then bounce it again to not have to sacrifice it. So the other reanimation target, as I said earlier, is Ulamog, so the cast trigger doesn't matter, but it's going to enter with a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the highest converted mana cost among cards in exile. This is relevant because the deck plays Solitude, which is a removal spell that exiles, and also, as it happens, it also synergizes with Ephemerate, basically allowing you to evoke it, then Ephemerate it, get the effect again, and not have to sacrifice it to the evoke. Ulamog also has Annihilator X, where X is equal to the number of counters on it. So since Vengeance gives haste, this can enter, be huge, wipe the opponent's board away, and swing for a ton of damage. The deck also typically plays Fagi Archaeologist, Psychic Frog, and Emperor of Bones, all of which help with consistency. The Archaeologist mills 3 cards, then returns a non-land, non-creature to hand. So ideally, it's going to put Atraxa and Ulamog into the graveyard and return a Vengeance or Ephemerate to hand. Also, if you're struggling, you can always use Ephemerate to blink the Archaeologist just to dig a bit more, right? Psychic Frog can discard a card to get a +1/+1 counter, and it can exile 3 cards from the graveyard to gain flying. So this is a discard outlet for your reanimation targets that you draw, and the exile ability can make Ulamog bigger, right? You can exile a 3 cost thing just to make sure Ulamog enters with 3 counters and has Annihilator 3. It also can just be a game-winning threat. It can get a few counters and start beating down in the air, and when it does that, when it deals damage to the opponent, it's gonna draw cards. So it's both an enabler, filling the gaps and making the combo more consistent, while also just sometimes being a threat. Emperor of Bones exiles a card from a graveyard every turn. So once again, this is going to make Ulamog bigger by exiling something or acting as a main board graveyard hate card. But if you adapt it, meaning you pay 2 and you get 2 +1/+1 counters, it will put a creature card exiled with it onto the battlefield with a finality counter. So once again, it's just like Vengeance, it's going to give it haste, then sacrifice at end of turn, but once again, you can ephemerate it to wipe the finality counter and keep the creature permanently. So this functions as a backup Goyro's Vengeance that's just a little bit slower, but I mean, it's just extra copies of your key reanimation spell, basically. Two other key cards in the deck are Tainted Indulgence and Force of Negation. The first is going to draw 2, then discard a card unless you have 5 or more mana costs in your graveyard. The idea here is just to dig 2 cards deep and discard a reanimation target, and the Force is a counter spell that allows you to exile a blue card to cast it for free. This can be huge for protecting your reanimation spell for free for 0 mana, and once again, that exile could help Ulamog be more powerful. The deck also plays Thoughtseize. It's pretty important to be able to look at your opponent's hand and make sure it's safe to move forward with your reanimation plan. Literally just a single spot removal spell or a counter spell can be devastating, so this is pretty important to just make sure the coast is clear to start going off. And when the deck does play removal, it's usually exile based. Because Ulamog likes things in exile, you do typically find exile-based removal in this deck. Other cards that aren't in 100% of decks, but you still might see pretty often, include Gristlebrand and Emrakul, which are sometimes played as alternate reanimation targets. They're just big, powerful things. That's it. Some players play Profane Tutor or Overlord of the Baelmerk for more consistency. The Profane Tutor is a tutor, the Overlord is another mill and get something out of the graveyard thing. And I've even seen some players playing the Asimo food package, which makes the deck a little bit more grindy, though it isn't terribly common at the moment. Almost no decks play this right now, but it has been played enough in the past that I thought I would at least mention it. But regardless, the general idea of this deck is it wants to reanimate a huge creature with Goyro's Vengeance and then use Ephemerate to avoid sacrificing it at end of turn. Ideally, that's going to be an Atraxa, because Atraxa just gets you more cards, so you can do it again. There are, of course, tons of variation from deck to deck, as always, and there will likely continue to be developments as the metagame evolves and as new cards are released, so be sure to check the description below. I will leave links to metagame tracking websites so you can see the most up-to-date deck list at the time that you're watching this. But in the meantime, I hope this video was useful. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I will see you in the next one.